Today's big show is going to focus on big business in our industrialization unit. I'm going to start though by talking about laissez-faire capitalism, which is the policy that government should be involved as little as possible with the nation's economy. Laissez-faire capitalism's government policy, which is in essence a no policy or no regulation regarding business, really benefited big companies, not the workers. So I'm talking about big business, I'm talking about these big corporations. By 1900, big business dominated the American economy. So the biggest component of big business would be the corporation, which is an organization that is authorized by law to carry on an activity, but treated as though it were a single person. Organizers raise money by selling shares of stock, which is really a certificate of ownership. Stockholders, those who buy the shares of stock, receive a percentage of the corporation's profits or in dividends. And as this cartoon says, sales, profits, and impatience are growing. People invest in companies because they want to make money. They want the corporations to make a profit. I think it's interesting that oftentimes, and lots of people can own stock. I own stock. Lots of your parents may own stock. We forget sometimes when we want to blame big companies for their behaviors, they are being pushed oftentimes by stockholders who want them to earn profit. The corporation exists legally as an entity, as an individual. The owners have limited liability. So, like if I own stock in a company, and I do, I can't be sued or be held responsible for the corporation's debts or other problems. Corporations can raise huge amounts of money on which to operate and sell more stock. And because of this, they have what is known as an economies of scale, which is the reduction in the cost of a product brought about, especially by increased production at a given facility. They're able to produce a lot more, and therefore they can produce it more cheaply. Along with this idea of corporation, with this idea of a trust, some corporations during this time period, so the late 1800s, formed trusts. The trust is a group of corporations turn control of their businesses over to a board of trustees. In other words, it's like they ran themselves as one giant corporation. The trustees run all of the companies as a single enterprise. This eliminates competition and destroys smaller companies who are not part of the trust. If a trust gains exclusive control of an industry, it holds a monopoly. And a monopoly is something that if you have it, you have control over almost everything else within that area of enterprise. A monopoly has almost complete control of the industry and can charge any price it wishes. And if a single company or a trust, a group of companies all run as one company, all band together, and they can charge the consumer any price they want, and they control everything. So we're going to look at two individuals now within this time period who demonstrated behaviors and were so successful that they are like figureheads for this time period. We'll start with Andrew Carnegie, who controlled the steel industry. Carnegie used economies of scale, buying supplies in bulk and producing goods in large quantities. Carnegie also used something called vertical integration. He acquired the companies that provided the materials and services upon which making steel depended. So, for example, he would own the coal mines and that they would use to run the furnaces and smelt the iron ore. He also owned the mines that got the iron ore, and he owned the train lines that brought the iron ore and the coal to his factories, his steel mills. And he owned the steel mills. Then he owned the rail lines that went and took the steel to different cities to be sold, to be used in manufacturing. Vertical integration, up and down. Think it from the bottom of it would be where the raw materials are, and the top is the finished product. Carnegie sold his company in 1901 to J.P. Morgan for $500 million. In 2015 dollars, that would be $14 billion. Carnegie would donate $350 million of his $5 million or $9.7 billion in today's money, and much of it used to build libraries all across the country. This is a picture of one library. I believe this one is in Dubuque, Iowa. There is a Carnegie Library in Dubuque, Iowa, and especially east of the Mississippi, in lots and lots of towns and cities, you're going to see Carnegie libraries. He built libraries and filled it with books. He also had built Carnegie Hall in New York City, pictured here. The next entrepreneur we're going to look at is John D. Rockefeller. He started Standard Oil Company and gained control of almost the entire oil industry in the United States. He used vertical integration, owned companies that controlled each step of the oil refining. He also used something called horizontal integration. He controlled many of the other companies selling oil. So basically every single place that you would buy gasoline from, you were buying it from John D. Rockefeller. No matter what the name of the company was, whether it was Casey's or Hy-Vee or Exxon or whatever company it was, the gas would be sold by Rockefeller. If his competitors would not sell their company to him, he tried to drive them out of business. And he would do this, and this cartoon shows him, the Standard Oil Company is a giant octopus that would control everything. And how he would do this is, if there was a company in, let's say, St. Louis that was selling more than he was and he couldn't buy them out, they refused to sell, he would take a loss on his oil products in the city of St. Louis. If they were selling it for 50 cents a gallon, he would sell it for 20 cents a gallon. And he would take a loss in St. Louis because he was making profit everywhere else around St. Louis. And so if you were in St. Louis and you wanted to buy gas or any oil product, you're going to buy it from Rockefeller's place and therefore drive the other company out of business. In 1882, Standard Oil formed the first trust. By the end of the 1800s, the Standard Oil Company controlled over 90% of the nation's petroleum refining capacity. As I said, if you bought gasoline in the United States, you bought it from Rockefeller. At the time of his death in 1937, his assets equaled 1.5% of the total U.S. economy. And I think that's an important way to look at it because dollars buy different amounts than it did today than it did in 1937, for example. So it's important to look at this as a percent of the total U.S. economy. He controlled by himself 1.5% of the total U.S. economy. That would be $340 billion, or somewhere on the order of maybe 4 times more than Bill Gates today. 4 times wealthier. John D. Rockefeller gave away a lot of his money, $550 million, but if John D. Rockefeller was a billionaire in 1937, and he was, worth many, many, many billions of dollars, as I said, $340 billion in today's money, he gave away a much smaller percentage than Carnegie did. But he did give away $550 million, 2% of his total wealth. Now, selling all of these products, this industry, we have a couple new innovations. The first is the department store. We're going to talk about Wanamaker's in Philadelphia, pictured here. It's one of the earliest department stores, and they're also probably the first to use aggressive advertising in newspapers and things, and really to get consumers into their store. And they had these big palaces of department stores. And the second thing we're going to look at would be the mail order, which was a huge revenue-producing stream for companies. In this case, Montgomery Ward, we're looking at in Sears and Roebuck. And you see a Sears and Roebuck catalog pictured here from 1897. Now, Montgomery Ward and Sears are really non-existent anymore, but more than 100 years ago, they were a driving force in retail. Because if you bought things, you bought them oftentimes mail order from Sears. It is the Amazon of 1900. And that's our big show for today on Big Business.